This is Emmy. I'm talking to Victoria today. We're talking, I guess, mostly about change and what's happened since we spoke with her last, which I think was a little bit over a year ago. So it's been like 14, 15-ish months since we last spoke with Victoria. And I know this from the Discord, she has changed quite a bit. And it makes me think a little bit about the first time I saw somebody change quite a bit. And it was my brother from the book. You would know him as being Jim. So Jim started seeing a therapist. He had like some life events happen that kind of finally forced him to go see a therapist after all those years. And it's only been, I mean, he was probably in his mid 30s, late 30s or something. So it hasn't been so long. He lived most of his at least young adult life without the benefit of the therapist or anything. And then within like 10 months, he was like a different person. And it was so astonishing to me, because I had grown up, and lived my adult life with him, basically being this person that was mostly functional, but also, had these times in which he was not functional. And I had to kind of like step in. I remember he didn't have a cell phone, for instance, until about this time, actually, even though, he's not much older than I am. So everybody had cell phones, but he did it intentionally because he didn't want people to be able to reach him. So stuff like that was just like, deeply kind of irresponsible behavior, mixed in with like normal adulthood, was kind of his MO. So I was actually the first one that bought him a cell phone when he had kind of some bad stuff happen, and he had to for basically, not court ordered reasons, but almost as serious, be able to be reached at various times. So I bought him a cell phone. I put him on my cell phone plan. It's just be like he could not kind of function as an adult in certain ways. And then after he went to therapy, and it was so fast, 10 months later, he was like this normal person, like not normal in like a normal kind of bum way that sometimes normal people can be, but like a really self-actualized person who didn't really have the same flaws. He still makes mistakes or whatever, but kind of all that underlying whatever childhood trauma, whatever else was causing his behavior was just gone. And he was like a very different person, but not in a bad way. It was more like he was the best version of himself. And he continues to become a better version of himself as he continues to, kind of embrace certain behaviors and beliefs and self-integration, self-actualization. And so I was really amazed, and that was probably just like a year or two, maybe a year and a half or something before the book came out. So when the book came out, and I was like, well, okay, I have nothing going on. My life has gotten almost entirely derailed, at least in terms of what I had before. Many relationships either got derailed or were different or stopped. Definitely my professional life was derailed and kind of went an entirely different direction, but stalled for a really long time, to the point where I was like, I don't know. Yeah, I think I may have mentioned before in another interview, I had like a spreadsheet to see how long my money would last or when I would might have to like start working at Taco Bell, which is not to say anything, bad about Taco Bell. Taco Bell delicious, right? Of course, but that was kind of what I was thinking, was maybe the extent of my possibilities, was the only thing that might be available to me at the time. So then I started seeing the same therapist, because I was like, if this therapist is like a miracle worker, then great, I can start seeing this therapist and we'll just see what happens. And it's funny, I took much longer than my brother. I think I graduated from therapy like 5 years in. I graduated to every other week therapy probably three years in or something, 3 or 4 years. So it wasn't like always intensive therapy, but I think part of it was the first 5 or 6 months. Man, my therapist must have just been like, she is not getting it. And he was really good about it too, because he would be, very careful. And he said this multiple times at the beginning. He's like, I'm not going to give you the answer because, studies show that if you make a realization personally, it's much more long lasting than it is a realization that, or a truth that somebody has just told you. And I think we get that I like the movie Inception to illustrate this concept because it's kind of true. If you think it's your idea, if you think this is coming from you, then you're much more likely to stick with it than if you think that it's being pushed on you. Probably some evolutionary reasons there, like scam artists or whatever, manipulators. We have like an inherent sort of, our cackles raise when we think somebody's trying to kind of pressure us to do something. So my therapist was really good about just waiting for me to kind of come to certain realizations. But, maybe this suggests that I was worse off than my brother. Even though people looking at me that would be like, okay, your sister's a law professor and you act like this, they probably thought he was worse off in a lot of ways, or that some of his behaviors were more kind of obviously struggling, is probably the best way to put it. But I took much longer, but I was just really amazed because I never had, even in my kind of vocabulary or my experience, or it's like learning, like quantum physics or something, and like the true nature of time. And you're like, wow, this is just totally contrary to what I would have guessed is possible. The amount of change that happened with him. And then I experienced it myself, just slower in like slow motion. And then I do kind of like feel like I'm different. And kind of during that therapy period, I would sometimes think, okay, wow, I'm really different than how I described myself in the book in certain ways, and in other ways, not really different at all. And in fact, I've kind of mentioned this, I think, before. I still don't think empathy or feel empathy. I even question if it's real. In fact, I was talking to my mom about this like yesterday, and I was like, yeah, talking. Who knows why it got brought up or whatever. I was like, I don't even think it exists, and she's like, oh, no, there's no way. There's no way that you could possibly be feeling somebody else's feelings. And then I was like, maybe.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We can never know for sure.
But she didn't even have the illusion of thinking that was an experience that she had ever had. So I was like, she's less empathetic than maybe I've ever thought. Like, why have I never noticed that my mother doesn't even believe in empathy? Doesn't experience it, doesn't even believe in it. So that was a funny conversation too. Yeah. So just kind of like thinking about all these sorts of changes that happen, but some stuff has stayed the same. But I want to write this second book, right? To kind of help people to see that things can be different, because I think a lot of people they just don't know better. I forget if it's a Bible scripture or Mormon scripture, but it kind of says, it's very poetically written. It's like they're looking for the truth everywhere, but they can't find it. Basically like if they only knew where to find the truth, then they could adopt it. And that totally was my brother. Once he started seeing the therapist, it was just like immediately like, a sponge soaking up, oh, okay. And all the self-realizations that just like flowed from that were so great for him. And I just wonder, since my therapist has passed away, and I sometimes wonder, like, what are we going to do with like my nephews and nieces, like that generation? If they have a hard time, who are we going to send them to? Because we used to just send everybody to this therapist. And now that he's passed away, who's going to help them? So I do feel kind of a little bit of a burden of this, like he's taught me certain things. I think these certain things are not commonly understood, even amongst normal people, but very uncommonly understood amongst psychopathically minded people. So I feel this as a little bit of a burden, but I also just want it kind of to be like a message of hope. In a lot of ways, I'm glad that I wrote the book. And I thought this too, as I was changing, I was glad that there was like this snapshot, it's like these, like photos that you see of people, really awkward ones, they're missing teeth, school photos or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you did look like that. Or I was looking at, I won't mention the name, but just the teenage daughter of famous celebrities. And I was like, man, everybody looks awkward when they're like 13 or 14, right? Like, wow, okay, and I'm sure, it's a truth or whatever. You kind of go through stages, but it's nice to kind of remember, not only, to think, okay, this is who I am, but also kind of remember who you were, especially because if I'm kind of advocating for a change, or at least trying to spread a message of hope I guess, about there being the possibility of change, then it's nice to see, this is what it was, and okay, now this is what's been able to change. And it reminds me, it's one of my favorite Mormon leaders kind of told the story in a talk, and said the comedy, As You Like It, written by the English playwright William Shakespeare, depicts a dramatic change in a character's life. An older brother attempts to have his younger brother killed. Even knowing this, the younger brother saves his wicked brother from certain death. When the older brother learns of this undeserved compassion, he is totally and forever changed and has what he calls a conversion. Later, several women approach the older brother and ask, "Wast you? What's that you that did so oft contrive to kill your brother?" The older brother answers, "'Twas I, but 'tis not I. I do not shame to tell you what I was, since my conversion so sweetly tastes, being the thing I am." So my brother Jim, loves that talk too, and he often says that, like when people kind of mention something from his past, he's kind of like, "'Twas I, but 'tis not I." It's totally true, and he has no problems admitting those sorts of things, especially because just like the character in the Shakespeare play, he feels he's so different now that he doesn't even feel kind of connected to those kind of, let's say, like problematic behaviors. And I said that my brother was the first person I saw change dramatically. I guess now as I'm saying that, that's not quite true, because also my mother. So I describe my mother mostly in the book, early childhood mother, but starting around like when I was like 12 or 13 or 14, she started going to therapy, and she was so different as a result of it. She started putting up boundaries with my dad and started having kind of like her own kind of sense of self, her own kind of inner world that she was much more protective about. And so she was much more stable as a parent, as a person, as just somebody to kind of rely on. So she was very different. And she'll talk now about it, and she's the same way. She'll talk super honestly about it, like, "Oh, yeah, I was crazy then." And she's even mentioned things that I didn't realize. Like apparently, something triggered this in her memory. She started talking about it recently. I think I may have mentioned it before, but she said she had a nervous breakdown like right after I was born. So I was like, "Ooh, that's not good." And she's like, "Yeah, there were like two babies in diapers. Like you never stopped crying. We had cloth diapers, and your dad was too cheap to buy a dryer, a clothes dryer. So she was having to wash all these diapers, and she was hanging them on the line." Oh, I remember now. It's because my brother Jim has like since been kind of diagnosed with some like kind of gastrointestinal issues. And she thinks, she's like, "Oh yeah, now I remember. He used to throw up all the time, like when he was a toddler." And she's like, "Maybe I should have taken him to the doctor, and maybe I should have taken you to the doctor." She's like, "But I think I was just so embarrassed because she couldn't kind of get her ish together enough to kind of like care for these children that she had. And she felt that there was like a stigma. And so like, because there was this whatever stigma expectation that she'd just be able to handle all of these things, to take care of everything, then like we both had like these medical problems that just never got help, so you're like, oof. And so she wonders now, she's like, if I had taken your brother to the doctor and resolved whatever it was then, would he still have these gastrointestinal issues, or these a lingering issue of damage perhaps that was caused by all of this stuff that was happening during this time period? So she's, but again, she's like very open to the idea of it. She's very kind of willing to address these issues. She's very willing to kind of think that, hey, that could have been something, but she's also very forgiving of herself. She knows that she did the best she could, but she doesn't want other people to have to go through the same thing. So I think that's kind of like probably the best theme and kind of intro of what we're going to be talking about. But I guess, I always start off questions or start off these Zooms with asking people, what is it like to be you? And so maybe I'll just pitch that to you, Victoria. What is it like to be you? But also
Yeah.
feel free to describe what it was like to be you before.
Mhm.
So go ahead and take it however you want.
Yeah, I think it will make more sense to start with what it was for me. Otherwise, I just jump in and talk about the change, and people will be like, "What were you before? That's so different." So I guess I can start with childhood experience. So I previously mentioned that I didn't really have childhood trauma, or my background or upbringing is not really that dysfunctional, because one, I only live my own childhood. I didn't really have any other childhood as a template to compare to, if it makes sense.
Yes.
And also, I kind of have a resistance to label anything in the past as trauma or abuse, because I feel like people do that a lot, and you kind of have this tinted lens of looking at your past, because people are complex. Like, the treatment you get, it's not always all good or all bad. And most of it really depends on how you look at it. And I didn't really have a, I guess, identity to say for sure I think they're bad or good. It is just the way it is. Yeah, and also talking about childhood trauma. So recently I was in a gathering with a bunch of people that I'm not really close with. And then we ended up talking about like childhood experience and such. And my husband brought up a very good question, which is, if you find out that every other kid, when they were young, will get a new toy every week, you're the only one who didn't, does that count as traumatic childhood then? So like replace the new toy with a lot of other things. That's where things kind of get murky. Yeah, but listening to what people consider traumatic childhood experience, I kind of thought back and realized that, oh, I had some experience that's similar to what they think are troubling them, but I never really have those memories keep playing in my head like a record, like, oh, this childhood shaped me and now I'm like having PTSD or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and I can talk about a few stories like that,
Uh-huh.
if that's helpful.
Well, it is kind of interesting that you mentioned this. I've been thinking this recently about our rush to kind of pigeonhole people. And I think it's important to realize that, you may think that it's helping somebody to be like, hey, I understand, you were abused as a child. I accept that, and understand that. And that may or may not be true about the person. So I'll give you like another example. It's obviously an analogy, not a close one, but like there is I'll just name this celebrity so you guys can look this up, verify it. So Shiloh Jolie Pitt, right, is a child who has, like when she was younger, her parents were really open about like, oh yeah, she really explores gender. She doesn't just like stick to kind of one thing about gender. And a lot of people, including, you can kind of look this up, Amber Rose, for some reason, the yeah.
Johnny, yeah,
Yes.
Johnny Depp's ex.
Oh no, that's Amber
No?
Heard. So Amber
Oh,
Rose
okay.
is Kanye West's ex, and then
Oh,
yeah, I hate to define them in terms of their ex or whatever. I think she's an actress and a model, and she also is the mom of Wiz Khalifa's child, I think. Anyways, so she this was like 10 years ago or something now, like 6 years ago, 8 years ago. She said something about like, called Shiloh Jolie Pitt by John, the name John, which I guess is a name when she was little she wanted to go by because of Peter Pan, and then said, yeah, John Jolie Pitt, trans rights, kind of something, whatever. And now Shiloh, I guess, is not. I mean, people can use their own judgment, but she showed up to a recent kind of red carpet event wearing a dress, long hair, looks presenting as female. And it's kind of like, why do we have that urge to tell whoever, children, that you're trans, you're not really a girl, you're a boy? It's not like people are satisfied to just be like, I will let you have your truth. they want to also characterize that truth and kind of pigeonhole you as well. Like that's abusive behavior or whatever. It's like, well, okay, it's a really good hypothetical, I think, that your husband posed, which is, different strokes for different folks a little bit, and like different cultures, different contexts. You just kind of don't know. Everybody's so uncomfortable, it seems like, with uncertainty, that they're so quick to want to put you in a pigeonhole, pigeonhole you as this or that. And it's like, can we just be okay with the fact that we don't know yet, or we still haven't thought enough about it, or whatever else it is. Anyways, yeah, I was just thinking about that as you were talking about kind of abusive situations. You can tell like a childhood abusive stuff, or if you want to just like skip to like, what was the result of the abuse, like what did that kind of lead to in terms of how you were.
Yeah, so I don't even think of it as abuse. So I'll just tell story of what happened. Because recently someone who listened to my first interview asked me if I feel loved by my parents. And I say, yes, I actually do. But a constant theme in my childhood is it is not the way I want to be loved. And yeah, and then I said the best way to kind of give you an idea what I mean by this is to tell you this story where when I was 7 or 8, so one day I went to school and I didn't wear my watch. So I left my watch at home. And then halfway through the day, my mom showed up at the classroom door, and she just like handed me the watch. And then I say, oh, okay. So I just took it and went back to class. And then that day when I went home, she was very mad. So she was like, you know how panicked I was when I was cleaning up the house and saw that you forgot your watch. And I had to like rush through the traffic and then find parking and then rush to your classroom door and handed you the watch that you forgot.
Right.
And you didn't even like express any guilt or gratitude. You just look at me like why did I do that? And like got the watch and walked back to the classroom. And so she was really mad. So like that's I think a story that really framed how my relationship with my mom is that she did a lot of things I did not ask for, and then kind of blame it on me on how much stress it gave her.
Yeah.
So yes, I do think she loved me, but it's not the way I want to receive love.
Yeah. I have a one that it reminds me of, kind of similar thing. My dad was this way. Like I remember coming home from Universal Studios in Los Angeles, the theme park, and the power was off because he hadn't paid the electrical bill. And I was like, cool that we went to a theme park. Obviously, every kid wants to go to a theme park, but what I want more than that is to have electricity, when we come home, to have that sort of stability of knowing, it's not the first time the electricity got cut off, right? So having the stability of knowing that this is something that you're willing to do. And I think you see a lot of that, where parents are, I am guilty of it too. The love languages, learning about them actually changed my life, to know everybody has their own preference or whatever. And I think it's really shows a lot of respect and acknowledgement of somebody's personhood to try to communicate to them or try to love them the way that they want, instead of just the way that you want to give for whatever reason. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's a very telling story.
Yeah, and then also another thing about my mom that I heard someone else talk about how when she was young, when her dad punished her, she was not allowed to show any emotions. Like she would get even more punishment if she has any, if she show any facial expression. And I was like, actually, it was kind of like that with me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I wasn't allowed to cry if I was beaten up or scolded. Like I was not allowed to pout even or frown. I was just supposed to take it with a straight face. And I didn't think much of it And now that thinking back, maybe my guess is maybe my mom would feel guilty for having to punish me. So she didn't want me to kind of like emotionally blackmail her into stop punishing me.
Mm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just guessing it might be something else. Maybe she just think that I deserve it and had no rights to be sad or angry about it.
You know, I can tell even by the way that you're talking and the subjects that you're choosing. So the nuance of the things that you're choosing to tell this time compared to like the 14 months ago, that you're different. You know? Because you remind me too, my mom is this way too, of where she will just kind of just constantly not reevaluating things in her life, but just constantly kind of trying to open herself up to the possibility of like new truths. And so I think this is like one thing that really characterizes you this time. It's not that you weren't open last time, it was just that you didn't really uh you weren't it maybe weren't talking about the same types of topics, and maybe that reflects like a change in your interest or a change in your focus or a change in your perspective. But it does seem like a richer, it's like a deeper, you know, analysis, whereas before it was like, you know, let's focus on behaviors. I mean, people probably listening are like, it's not that extreme to, you know, have your mom get mad at you about the watch. That's not an extreme story, not at all, right? But it is a very interesting way to kind of try to like humanize kind of your experiences in a way that I don't. Is this okay to kind of say something like an observation that may be a little bit sensitive about you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in a way that I don't think really characterized your thinking before. I don't think you did try to kind of contextualize your experiences in like this to humanize kind of, or to humanize the people in your life, to humanize yourself as much as it seems like you do now when you kind of tell these stories.
Yeah, I did not put any significance to it.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't think that it was of particular interest in any way. Yeah, it's mostly listening to people talk about things, and then it's really intriguing that they would label that as traumatic, because I have had the same experience and I didn't really think it's like that much different or worth mentioning. Yeah, and then the watch story, that's just like a small representation of the theme of my mom's parenting method, because you put that to like academic results or like mannerism when meeting other adults. And I was very isolated as a child because I was never allowed to go out with people my same age other than when I was in school. And it's because she thought that people my age would be bad influence. Yeah, for whatever reason.
Yeah, like 4 and 5 year olds or something. Bad influence.
Well, yeah, I was never allowed to hang out with my friends until I graduated high school. So I never really learned socializing with like people my age.
Yeah.
Other than in school setting.
Huh. And so she's trying to protect you, but do you think she was trying to protect you? Do you believe the reason she gave, that it was to avoid bad influences?
Well, she said she didn't believe in happiness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she's kind of like tiger mom, if you have heard of that term.
Yes,
like,
I have.
Yeah, so like Asian people, tiger mom, all she care about is results. She doesn't care if I've tried my best and still not gotten the results she wanted me to get. Because she said no one in real world, no one care how much effort you have put in. They only care about how much success you manage to achieve in the end.
You know, so this is it's interesting because, you know, there are two things. I'll tell a quick story about my niece because I just think she's wrong about that. And then I'll tell a quick, or I'll ask you a question if you can help me remember. This is what I'm telling you to help me remember
Okay.
about process versus outcome orientation, right?
Yes.
So yes, about my niece. So she's a toddler, right? And we camp at the beach every year. The whole family does, right? My extended family. And so the very last day of the beach, she's out there, and all the younger nieces and nephews were and my cousin's kids and whatever, were like digging a hole and then filling it with water. It was like this classic child. Oh, this is awesome. This is fun. And then we'll have like a little pool. They're like building a pool. So she wants to join in, and she gets like the world's smallest little cup, like smaller than like a can of soda, a can of Coke cup. It's got like maybe like 8 ounces or something. And she's like just moving the water from a little kiddie pool that we had set up to the pool, the sand pool that the kids had set up. And I watched her do this for like 40 minutes. Just go back and forth. And I was just almost mesmerized by how engaged she was in it. She was just like, this was her ish. It was like for her, her jam, the reason of her existence that in that moment was just to do this. She was so kind of caught up in it. You could tell that she was just like enjoying herself. She was very much in the flow, like all these things that we want in our lives. We want to feel that engaged in the things that we're doing in our life. We want to be that kind of excited to be doing the very thing that we're doing. And I was like, these little cups of water are doing nothing, essentially, objectively, to fill up the sand pool. They're doing nothing. And I was like, how can she kind of not see this? And I just like thought about it this was just this past summer or whatever. I thought about it for like a day or two, thinking about this little cup of water thing. And then I kind of had like this realization that actually like choked me up inside a little bit, like the strength of the truth, the realization, the epiphany that I had was that why am I so focused on whether it matters kind of to the external world? Why am I so blind to the way that it matters internally to her? Like we do so much with the idea that all that matters is the external world, and whether we're making a difference in the world, we only look at others to see whether we're making a difference in the world. We almost never actually look to ourselves and see whether we're making a difference in the world by the changes that are happening inside or the way that makes us feel inside. Yeah, it was really interesting. And so that, and then the question I did remember, which is, so with your mom being so focused on externals like that, would you say that you were mostly process oriented, like it's, if I do my best, that's enough? Or were you mostly outcome oriented, which is focusing on the outcome and making your choices in order to achieve a particular outcome?
Of course, the outcome.
Yes.
And
Okay.
I didn't care how I achieve it. Maybe I cheated in exam. It doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
Yeah. And another thing I think that caused me to not place so much emphasis, or maybe I just don't see the point of having emotions, is because like they are so, both my parents are so crazy
Mm.
with emotions at times. So they're either very detached and cold and like logical, or they're just like crazy,
Hmm.
crazy emotional, like shouting, crying, throwing things around. And yeah, like since I was 5, I think that was the first time when they got into a huge argument and my father threatened to leave.
Mm.
And he came to me and said, you know what, like I'm leaving you. You might not see me ever again. And this is because of your mom and your mom's family member. And it's not something that I want to do.
Hmm.
So that was like the first time I got the threat. And it just kept happening, but they never really left.
Yeah.
And my mom also used to like disappear for hours and then came home and say, you know what, I was so close to driving into a river and like and my life, but I didn't do it because I still love you guys and you are like a burden I didn't ask for, but I couldn't I couldn't just
Cool.
yeah.
Thanks for this.
Yeah. And so they talk a lot and show a lot of crazy emotions, but in the end nothing really changed. So I really like didn't see the point of or the like I don't see emotions as a legit thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I focus more on behavior because that's the thing that actually affect me, not how you display your emotion or what you claim you're going to do.
Yeah, and it's funny because I mean, you kind of weren't wrong a little bit, but it's like Newtonian physics versus quantum physics, right? It explained probably like 99% of what you observed, right? But did you ever kind of notice during your life that there was kind of a gap there, that there was something that didn't seem to, like that your way of dealing with the world wasn't was missing something, I guess,
Yeah,
didn't
yes,
explain that additional 1 to 2%.
yes. I don't feel connected to the world.
Mm,
Never, yeah, never felt like I belong or as a, what people call a calling or like passion, what to do in life. I never had that.
mm-hmm.
And it's so funny because I mentioned I had like a phobia of dying. I never really understood why, because life is not that exciting for me.
Right.
It was not. It was kind of just like chronic boredom and emptiness and disconnectedness. But like, why? What is it so great about life that I was so afraid of dying? And now thinking back, maybe because I never truly lived or never truly understood the meaning of life.
Mm,
That's why I didn't want it to end before knowing the answer or knowing why I'm alive.
yeah. And so I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit, did you feel negatively about this, or was it like, oh, that's just how things are, or were you kind of like, did you have any like, was there a rub there? Did it feel badly, to kind of miss out on this, or to have the sense that you were missing out on something?
No, to feel badly about it, I will have to have experienced something else to
Mm-hmm.
know that I'm missing it. But it had been my reality for most of my life. So I didn't really know that there was another possible way of existence. I didn't even know what to dream about
Yeah.
being different. Yeah.
Wow, that's very poignant. You didn't even know what to dream about, being different. So what changed then? Were you like motivated to change, or did you kind of just happen to accidentally? Because now you're different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like, how did that transition happen?
Yeah, I could not pinpoint to like one turning point. It's like everything just pieced together nicely and it was a gradual change. So a lot of it might have to do with my cancer diagnosis.
Mm,
At the time, I didn't really think it changed anything because the way I look at life was still the same. Like my husband actually asked me like, so if before I know the staging of my cancer, like if it's terminal, if you only have like 1 or 2 years to live, what would you want to do? Are you gonna like quit your PhD program, go travel, or like make peace with certain people? And I said no, not actually. I didn't want to change anything. I would just continue doing what I was doing, finish my PhD,
uh-huh.
not really going to travel, or like make peace with people. Like I think I'm on the right track was what I told him.
Uh-huh.
Like because I didn't feel like I want to change anything. Yeah, but then I think it kind of drive me to think about what is about life, like what's the point of life, and what's before life and what's beyond life. I guess since I was a child, I always had this question about who I am. Why I actually asked this to my parents, and they could never understood what I was asking. I will ask, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? Why am I in this body? Why am I living this life? So I always had this question, and um, going through cancer kind of made me explore more about that. And then I stumbled across upon spirituality, and then I started uh, know I started to know more about meditation. And in the beginning it was the scientific evidence of the health benefits of meditation that feel very appealing to me, that I look more into it, and it just eventually led me to a door that life is more than what I thought it could be.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I like that as an overview. Have you thought about like what were some of the early maybe realizations, or what were some of the ways that meditation kind of affected you that like opened the door? Like what was that kind of process like, as much as you can remember?
uh, it wasn't meditation. I guess it's more mindfulness
Hmm.
as a practice, because I was just so tired of being so concerned about survival.
Yeah.
And I think the obsession with survival makes me crave control and be like so outcome oriented, and it just make life so empty. So it kind of make no sense that I try so hard to survive, but I'm not actually living.
Yeah.
And I was just so tired of living that way. And when I didn't know what my cancer staging was, I thought to myself, you know what, actually, I wouldn't mind if I have to continue living a life of boredom. And what I would want to do is really focus on the sensation of living, just the sensation of breathing, walking, wind on my face, and all this alone would be enough, would be worth living for.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I got to the point where survival, living for survival, not living for survival, like being so obsessed with survival is really not how I want to live the rest of my life.
Hmm.
So I practiced mindfulness more, and then meditation was something I would never, never do in the past. Like just the concept, the idea of it makes me want to cry. Like I was already so bored, and you want me to just sit there and not do anything, or like not feel anything. I guess that's what most meditation practice are like. You dissociate or detach from emotions or whatever. I already didn't have much of it, and you want me to do more
Right.
of that. It just wasn't very appealing. But yeah, the meditation I got introduced to is more about focusing on your sensation, like zooming in, expanding your focus on everything rather than dissociating. And that is really interesting to me, and it's very fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good. I think that you kind of bring it up. I think I've mentioned this before because now it's been like a year, and even though it's been a while since the last Zoom, it hasn't been a year. With us, it has been, but not the
Mm-hmm.
last one I've done with somebody else. But yeah, I had a health coach like say, okay, yeah, try meditation, kind of, well, at least suggest. And I was like, I'll try it, because I always try to keep an open mind, try to be open about things like that. And I was surprised about meditation. There are different types. As you say, some are kind of more like dissociating, and some are more like have kind of an awareness of almost a hyper awareness of the present. And I
Mm-hmm.
found that also to be like very relaxing. And it's funny, they kind of, at least mine, he's Jeff Warren on the Calm app is the one that I listen to most frequently. And he talks, would say, okay, you find a home base. And I found, through like days and days and days, of doing this, that my favorite home base was to just imagine the space around me and to like be like very aware, because your eyes are closed, or mine are, of the just like the 3D world that exists around me, with the sounds. So I hear like the plane flying overhead, or I hear whatever, and to just imagine myself kind of in like this circle of existence. And it was super relaxing, and also really interesting to realize how often I don't do stuff like that. Another thing I did with mindfulness is I don't like to do the dishes that much, stuff like that. But then I started to, when I'd be like, oh, I don't want to do the dishes, I'd be like, let's just really get into the dishes, like the water. Wow, this water is so crazy, like just really feel it. The soap, wow, it's so slick. I can't believe that, and the sound is just like, it's like a waterfall of sound or whatever. So it is interesting that you're afraid of the meditation because of the boredom. You just equate it to more boredom, but in getting deeper into something, you actually become less bored. You think as you keep getting deeper, more micro instead of kind of macro. And the opposite is true. The more macro you get and think of yourself like in the universe, like it's interesting because at any moment, we're only perceiving and aware of certain things. Kind of we get in a rut of just kind of being perceptive of the most, I don't know, salient kind of things. We're doing the dishes. We're just thinking about getting them done. We're not thinking about the water. We're not thinking about the soap. We're not thinking about the universe, And then if you do that though, it's like in any moment you can kind of like take yourself in or out of the moment in a way that is experiencing reality differently and very novel. So I think that's like the one thing that I would kind of pitch to people who are psychopathically minded and are a little bit skeptical about it is I do think this is a good thing for boredom. Is that your novelty seeking impulses can be addressed, and satiated through meditation. Not necessarily that everybody should do it, it's for everybody or whatever, but that I do think it's probably good for people to try.
Yeah, what more to lose? Just try
Exactly.
it. There's
Yeah.
nothing to lose here. Yeah, and also if you decide to try it, just give it 100% so you can have a fair assessment of whether it works or not. That's kind of the mentality I had going
So
into it.
I agree with you about this 100% thing, and sometimes in like religious ways, I might kind of refer to it and maybe even talk to like Arya a little bit about it as she's tried to make changes. There has to be kind of this element of all inness that refer to as like faith. There has to just be like a desire to kind of just see if the thing works. An openness to it that's not really even engaged about like seeing if it works yet, but just to not to not even think about the outcome. I know the reason why we all do things is we hope for like a good outcome, not 100%, but that's often why we choose to make a change in our life, is we think it's going to make our lives better. But in this particular situation, to not even to put that on the shelf a little bit and to just try to do the thing for its sake, and like to really give it a chance, I guess, to be 100% in. But how were you able to make that choice? I think that's like a lot of faith or trust to do something like that. So like, why were you able to be like, I'll just try this. I'll just like see where it takes me, wherever it takes me.
I always think that whatever people are not changing, they are choosing it. So
Yes.
I guess
Mhm.
I was desperate enough to want change. And ironically, it was because I wanted more control.
Mm.
And yeah,
Okay.
I realized the external circumstances I could never control 100%. And there's one thing that I could have 100% control over, is myself. So my brain, how I think about certain things, how I feel about certain things, that maybe if I could control how I think about death, I wouldn't fear it anymore.
Mm.
If I could see the good in every outcome that was not what I wanted in the beginning, that I was able to embrace it and enjoy it. And in that sense, then I could have the choice of being joyful no matter what happened. And I think that's the most important thing for me, is to have choice. And yeah, and talking about choice, I want to talk about like my favorite word from the novel East of Eden. Tim Shaw. So it's a word from the Bible that was mentioned in the book East of Eden. Tim Shaw is the pronunciation of a Hebrew word from the 4th chapter of Genesis that translate to thou mayest, like you can, which is like you have the choice. But I think the modern, like the latest translation of Bible now kind of mistranslated to, it was a conversation, I think, with God, whether people will triumph over evil or sin. And the latest translation say you will, but the original Hebrew word was actually you may. So you have a choice, and I think it encompass what being a human is like, or what life is about. Is that you get to have a choice.
So to you now, so this is interesting. How long has this been kind of a belief of yours that like human experience is characterized by this idea of choice, that you Timshul, that you may thou mayest?
Mm-hmm.
Is this part of your like your new belief, or part of your change, or like when did you start kind of thinking, um, having this as a belief that was important to you?
I think since as young as I could remember,
Hmm.
I always wanted more freedom. I always did not want to follow the rules that my parents set, or what my society say I can or cannot do. And I just never really applied it internally until recently, because I did not know it is possible. Yeah, I used to think that life is just suffering and pain, and it's the same for everyone.
Dang it.
Yeah.
That's a baddie.
Yep.
So what is the shift then? Because I think, we were kind of mentioning, I mentioned at the beginning, I find your stories to be so hopeful. Just like I found my brother's story to be hopeful. Now I realize my mother's story to be hopeful. My story, I hope, is going to be hopeful to people. And it's so interesting that it's not like you became some other person, right? Would you
Mm-hmm.
describe that as being the change, or what does it feel like is the change that happened?
The change is that I'm now awakened
Uh-huh.
from a deep slumber. Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Mm.
so you always had this kind of like inner value, let's say, about thou mayest and choice, and about life, and the human experience being something that is like, you can or you can't, like it's a choice. You choose to do what you want with your life, and that is kind of what characterizes human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said that you never kind of knew it was possible. Like, what do you mean kind of by that?
I just felt like we are genetically programmed to feel a certain way towards what happened. Like some people are just born to not like something. For example, you just don't like being mistreated, or you just don't like to eat vegetables.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it has to do with genetics, and it might also be why I did my undergrad major in genetics. It's I kind of want to crack the code. Like, is there a way to not be controlled by my genetics?
Ah, uh-huh.
Hang on.
And while she is gone, just kidding.
Well,
I was just joking. While she is gone, no, just kidding. Keep going.
No, my husband was doing some noisy stuff. Ask him to
Okay.
stop.
So,
Yeah.
you saw genetics as being kind of like this thing that predisposed you to certain things, and you wanted to
Mm,
crack the code.
yeah, like can you imagine living with no fear? I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think people would have no fear. Like you need to have fear to be able to survive. And I think people are selfish. It is. We are just programmed that way to be selfish. Yeah. What else? Lazy. To be lazy, I guess.
So we have all these predispositions, but you wanted to be kind of free of even those, of the
Yes.
predisposition to be lazy, selfish, to have fear. You just wanted to have more than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I say more control.
Yeah.
Wanted more control is why I was compelled to look into this.
And so you feel like you've accomplished that.
I do. Yeah.
And how? Like, do you have more control, or like, how would you say you now relate to these genetic predispositions, and what has been the change?
If you don't assign value to what happened, everything can be a positive experience.
Mm.
Yeah, if you don't label what treatment you get from people, then it's not really that bad.
Yeah.
It's not a threat to your survival.
That's kind of interesting because, like, one thing that I have noticed, I kind of feel badly for normal people, is I feel like they make a lot of wrong assumptions. I'm sure I made assumptions before, but I felt like I was a little bit more objective than they were. Still made assumptions. Still, I'm sure when I was a 5-year-old, for instance, believed in Newtonian physics, no concept of, still understood the world incorrectly, but just not as incorrectly as everybody else, with the cloud maybe of their emotions, or the cloud of, like, kind of constantly interpreting events and things that were happening in their externals, in terms of how it affected them, how it benefited them, and more than that, what it meant to them. Like, what effect that meant, like how that influenced who they are. And I just never had really those sorts of questions, like, the fact that, for instance, your parents are getting divorced or something, what does that mean for me as a person? My parents didn't get divorced, but that was kind of not the sort of, like, I don't want to say that they're making it all about them all the time, but they definitely are more mindful of their kind of identity, I think, in these kind of contexts. And it always kind of was weird to me. And so I was like, I feel like I am probably making better assumptions about what's happening. But now I've kind of lost my train of thought. Why did I start talking about assumptions? What'd you say right before this?
Uh, what what value you assign to things or
Oh, yes,
events? Yeah.
exactly. So, and one of these assumptions that people make is to be like, okay, if you have a night of insomnia, for instance, which I often have, that's a bad thing, because it's going to mean that it's going to be a day of, tired and grouchy, and, you'll have to, hopefully the next night you'll get insomnia. And like the worst thing that you can imagine is, insomnia after insomnia after insomnia, or the thought that, like, getting a cancer diagnosis is bad. It's like, it's hard to see this in terms of not necessarily bad or good, but just what it is, this neutral kind of equanimity that they kind of talk about in meditation. And I think meditation really does a good job helping you to not be reactionary and prejudge something without kind of giving it a chance, without just seeing where it goes. Because sometimes, like for instance, last night, I woke up, or this morning, I woke up earlier than I wanted to, didn't get quite the sleep I wanted to. And I thought, oh, yesterday, I'll share this. This is like, hopefully not too much information. But I started menstruating, I started bleeding like 6 days early. And I was like, ugh, This is the most frustrating thing, to start menstruating early. You're like, already this is like a huge hassle, and then to start early you're so annoyed. And then kind of last night though, as I was drifting off to sleep, I was like, you know what, but on the second day of bleeding, I am always the most soft-hearted that I am, and like kind of open-minded. And I was like, so this is probably actually good that I'm going to be talking to Victoria on the second day of bleeding, but kind of that, to see stuff, not to not kind of prejudge it, but to be like, it is kind of what it is, and let's just see. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something different?
Yes, this is also what karma means. I think I talk about that over Discord.
Yeah,
That
but
yeah,
remind me.
karma means action or your own doing. Like people kind of use it like, oh, you did something bad, so now something bad happened to you. It's your karma. But no, like actually, karma means action or your own doing. Like if you find these tortures, it's your own doing because you were the one who assigned value to it. And all actions have consequences, and action is not just behavior, it's also how you think about events or feel about events. And it's your own choice. So it's again back to the choice thing.
Yeah.
It's your choice.
A lot of people really push back on this idea. And so I'm going to push back just for these people, as kind of like a representative of these people, and ask you questions. How can it be somebody's choice, for instance, if somebody comes up and punches you in the face, like how can you choose not to be angry about something like that, for instance?
Okay, so this is also another thing. I think this is the one transformational thing that meditation had done for me, is that I no longer think in terms of me against other people or me against the world, but I think that we are one. And it was not possible before because I just never felt connected to people. I never felt empathy, so I didn't know how it was possible to think of, to be forgiving, I guess, to be forgiving and understanding. And the meditation I did was a practice taught by Sadhguru. So I did the inner engineering, and then at the end of it, we were initiated into like a 21 minutes meditation practice. And before that, I have read the testimony from people who participated before, and everyone said, oh, it was transformative, it was explosive. And I was like, we will see, because I'm a psychopath. I don't know if that will work the same, but I will just give 100%, give it a fair assessment. And as it happened, I just broke down in tears because for the first time in my life, I felt connected. I felt that I have completely let go of resentment and anger. And I knew from that point that my life is never going to be the same as before. That whatever people do, I can forgive them because I'm loved.
Because what was that last thing you said? Because what?
Because I am loved. Love is who I am.
You are love. You are
Yes,
uh-huh. And what
I
do you
am
mean by
love.
that?
I don't know. I don't have the vocab to explain it intellectually. It's more of a experiential thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can get like on board, let's say, with this sort of stuff, because when especially you think about like matter is basically energy and whatever, and spirituality, I think often is kind of thinking about like the various uh ways in which energy manifests itself, right? And how it's communicated, different types of energies. Then I am like, I'm Mormon anyways, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm on board or whatever. And it's so interesting to kind of think about like the difference between this experience and the what you experienced before, because what you said before, you just felt like you weren't connected to the world. I think I described on the blog, maybe in the book before, about how like if the world is like there, I just feel like I'm on the very surface. I'm just like, you know, like that sort of connection that you feel when you're like touching water with your fingertips, and there's a little bit of the pull that the water has on your fingertips, right? Because the water is kind of like clinging to the fingertips. You know, you can kind of tell there's just a little bit of a pull. That's how connected I felt. Like the gravity of the earth was so small for me, just barely keeping me there, you know, just barely keeping me kind of connected to the rest of the world. And then, so that's kind of, I really identify with that, what you said. And then, so to go from kind of that feeling like basically almost no connection to what's going on. And again, like how this happens, you know, probably a lot has to do with your sense of self, whatever else that we've kind of mentioned before. To kind of skip quickly through that, but then to go to like this experience in which you feel so connected. It sounds like you felt like immersed in your experience, immersed in your life, immersed in humanity, immersed in the world. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, and I really couldn't explain it because I think recently, a month ago, my sister-in-law was like going through this cycle of like torturous thoughts again, because she's not a psychopath, but she also had this thing with control, and she's very neurotic. I hope she's not listening to this. Yeah, anyway, so she was like complaining about all these problems, and I told her, you know, just do the inner engineering. It worked for me. If it worked even for me, it will work for you. And she was asking me like, why would it work? And then I said, it's not something intellectual that I could explain to you.
Mm.
You just have to experience it yourself. And it did work for her. So she's finally like past all those crazy anxieties and fear and resentment towards people.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of thinking about like this idea of control, right? Because
Mhm.
for whatever reason, seems like all psychopaths crave control. And that's basically why explains like a lot of the stuff that they do, the manipulation, the, you know, social engineering, the machinations, the orchestrating,
Mhm.
everything around them type stuff, you know, and poor victims of people, because other people want choice too, you know. They also don't want to just be
Yes.
puppets, you know.
Yeah.
So I totally get why they don't like that. They also want control. They also want to be, you know, autonomous individuals whose personhood is respected, you know. Right? If that characterizes human existence, the ability to kind of timshil thou mayest, then I can see why they're upset with us about some of the things that we do, right? Totally get it, you know, trying to be better about it, you know, trying to help others also who want to make this sort of change. But like, what about kind of you said that you actually feel in some ways more control, but is it more control or less control, or it's more control over certain things and less control over other things? Like, what is now your experience with your desire to control and your actual ways in which you try to control or don't try to control?
I have control to always experience joy no matter what happened.
Mm,
I think that it's the most important. And I don't feel the need to control things like I used to, because how boring it would be if life just turns out exactly how I want it. There's no surprise,
mm.
there's no growth. Everything has happened exactly I want it. What's the point of going through life if if everything just happens the way you want it? I think that obsession would only.
Hey, I think I cut out. Are you there?
Yes.
All right, keep going.
Yeah, so what was the last thing you heard me say?
So you said the obsession, like everything is turning out exactly as you wanted, and like kind of what's the point of life that's not a very interesting or engaging life if all you're getting is just what you wanted.
Yeah, yeah, there won't be any growth.
I bet there's plenty of people listening to that and being like, that sounds like the life I want.
I know. Yeah.
And so I think we should probably touch upon that issue a little bit, and say, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, it'd be awesome to be a psychopath and manipulate and kind of get everything you want. But the truth is kind of like, like a little bit poor little rich girl, like, or these, celebrities don't have that good of lives type thing. But I think there is truth there. Like, is it really satisfying to always get everything that you want?
And then what?
And then what? Exactly. And then what? Like, who
Yeah.
cares? And I think this is kind of another thing. So two things. Um, Now I've almost forgot this thing about Arya and the control. So we might have to touch on that later. But this idea of like, you can only, if you're orchestrating things all the time, right? You can only choose then the things that you are even aware of. So the example that I sometimes use with people is that you have, let's say, for instance, that somebody's asking you what you want to grow up to be, and you're like 6 years old, right? What professions do you even know about? You only know police officer from Paw Patrol. These are TV shows my nephews and nieces watch, right? You only know, you're like, yeah, train conductor, that's a total profession. Maybe bus driver because wheels on the bus. You know a couple other professions, and these are the ones that right? So you can only choose from what you know when you kind of when you have this kind of outcome focused mentality in which everything is always controlled. You're always, like everything's always put in motion to gain whatever the thing is that you're seeking to gain. And yeah, it's kind of fun and interesting to see whether you can really do it and then like ramp it up, like, oh, I was able to do X, let's try Y, let's try Z, let's see how far I can kind of go. That is pretty entertaining for a while. I'll admit
Mhm.
it. Like playground stage was awesome of being a
Yes.
psychopath. You're like, I'm
Yes.
all powerful, it does feel nice for a while. But then there is that, yeah, what next or whatever. It's kind of like the monkey's paw. You know that urban legend, monkey's paw?
No.
Monkey's paw gives you everything you wish for, but there's always like kind of some unintended consequence, or there's always like something bad that happens as a result.
Mm.
So it's a little bit like that. You do get what you wish for. That's pretty certain. I mean, not 100% like success rate, but like pretty high success rate, pretty high degree of like you can get pretty much whatever you set your mind on getting. Yeah, but what next? What is the purpose of just kind of getting these things? It's like what they say about the lottery winners, I think, is that they win the lottery, but their happiness improves in the short term, but it doesn't improve kind of in the long term. They kind of go back to where they were before in terms of life satisfaction. So you said you kind of learned to control certain things and control less things. Let's kind of introduce the idea of direct control and indirect control. So I think of that was like a big realization for me is I started gardening. I think after I was like fired from that like big law job or whatever, I started gardening, and then I kind of understood a little bit better the idea of indirect control, because as a gardener you can't make a plant grow. Right? It is like its own separate thing. All you can do is kind of indirectly change the conditions in which the plant exists in order to facilitate its growth. And it doesn't mean you don't control it, but it's a very different type of control. Same kind of things, like you can't kind of directly make yourself learn something or become a better pianist or something. You can't just directly kind of drill it into your brain. The only thing you can kind of do is change the conditions to engage in the sorts of behaviors that are more likely to facilitate that happening. And luckily I did, I was a music major, so I understood the ability, that kind of concept, that there were like limitations or there was like this indirect control. There are also things that you can more directly control. I can, like, for instance, turn off the microphone right now, or we both directly chose to be on this today, to talk to each other, and I'm choosing the words that I'm saying for the most part. So there is direct control there. Sam Harris would say there's no free will, I think. But I think practically speaking, that's a pretty rough sketch of that. So like what types of things do you think that you can directly control? Or like does that kind of like explain a little bit your shift in thinking about control, the direct versus indirect?
Yeah, so I guess not only for psychopath, I think for everyone, uh, they want control because they want to avoid suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, but what is suffering? It is defined by you. If you don't think of it as a suffering,
Yeah.
and then there's no suffering.
So
So that's, yeah,
I'm
control right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because maybe an obvious pushback that people would have is like, are you saying that like suffering isn't legitimate, or are you saying that suffering is a choice?
It
Uh,
is a choice.
mm-hmm,
It is legitimately a choice.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can be sick and still have joy. You can be missing a body part and still have joy.
Yeah,
Or you can choose to suffer over it. It's all your choice. I'm not saying that whichever is better. It's your choice. But
yeah.
are you choosing, or are you compelled? Or like, are you choosing consciously, or is it by compulsion that you feel that way?
So what would be kind of like, let's say somebody punches you in the face, right, and it hurts. Are you choosing to suffer by the fact that it really hurts? You're like laying on the ground, ow, that really hurt, very serious punch.
Yeah, I cannot choose what my body feel, but I did not have to mentally suffer for it. It didn't mean that I would just stand there and let you punch me to your content.
Hmm.
Maybe if that's what I want you to do, then I will do that. But it doesn't mean that I'll just let anyone take advantage of me, rob me of my money, sexually assault me, punch me in the face or whatever. It's mostly what I choose to do. And if things I don't want happen to me, I don't have to take it personally, but I would still choose the subsequent action that I see dim. Maybe I will sue you because I don't want this. I don't want to tolerate this kind of behavior. I don't think that people should get away with not respecting others. So I want to like go to court or whatever,
Hmm.
but I didn't have to feel offended and angry or resent you or feel vindictive over this thing that happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think maybe I am there with you, maybe not. But here's kind of the way I think of it, and maybe it's kind of an in between that might help people to think. So, I like to think. I guess there's who coined this, Stephen R. Covey, maybe, who did the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He kind of said there's like fixed mentality, and the fixed mentality in this terms, or no, scarcity mentality. In scarcity mentality, you're kind of like everything's kind of scarce, and everything is limited, all the possibilities are limited. I think, at least for me, let's say somebody punches me in the face. Now it could be a fight club situation, right, in which whatever's happening, or the somebody who punched me in the face could be my toddler niece. I mean, how often has that happened, that one of my nieces or nephews has punched me in the face? Like at least a half dozen, maybe a dozen, and they really mean it. It's not an accident. They come up and like punch you like in the face. And I always laugh, right? So I always kind of use this example with people who are like, I don't have a choice, or, to say that choosing suffering is somehow demeaning, is like, well, it's not like there's zero choice. Like, I think that I hope we can all kind of agree as to that. It's not like there's zero choice, because some people truly are, choosing joy in those moments. And it's, like we can tell because they volunteered for the fight club or whatever, or they do, BDSM, or for whatever reason, the punch in the face is like something that they enjoy. I always tell Arya, can you grab my meats? Which means, can you like grab like the section of my abdomen and just kind of shake it, jerk it, you know? And like I love that, you know, like there's lots of things that people could do that some people might not like, but other people could. And so this idea to kind of open your mind first, that it's not like there's only one choice to somebody punching you in the face. It's not like there's only one legitimate reaction that you could have. Not
Yeah.
even just one possible reaction, but then like one legitimate reaction or one reaction that people should have, because people kind of get so much in their mind of like shoulds, and this is just what has to happen. I agree with you on this. Like this is like their world of possibilities is limited. It is kind of a scarcity mindset. And I kind of like to think of things, you know, like let's just try to broaden that mindset just a little bit. Can you like open your mind to the possibility of just things being a little bit different, that that's not true for everybody, for instance, or that doesn't always have to be true for you? And once you can kind of like change your perspective, I think that my interpretation, at least, kind of this like attitude from like my own, you know, experience or study, is that it's largely, it's not like you're directly changing your emotion, because you could still kind of have an emotion or something. You're just, number one, trying to put space in between the event, you know, the punching of the face, and your reaction. So you're putting space there to not just kind of like default, you know, to your genetics or to your socialization, you know. And there's no Tim Show in there. There's no choice. There's no you. It's just kind of like 100% kind of your primitive first instinct. Instead, if you just put a little bit of thought and a little bit of choice, you know, make space and then put thought and choice there, then it becomes something richer, you know, something kind of as you say, potentially things that could lead to suffering don't necessarily lead to suffering. Like the examples I've told you, so I sometimes have like my best insights when I'm awake in my bed, you know, in total insomnia, and kind of knowing I'll probably will feel badly physically the next day. You know, it's almost certain that I'm going to feel badly. It's almost certain that I'm going to struggle to focus on things. It's almost certain that I'm going to have other negative kind of symptoms, and yet it can still be a blessing to have this experience. It can still be life enriching, and to focus on it that way really does, I agree, put you in the driver's seat a lot more in terms of choice. But why do you think people push back on this? Why do you think they don't want to experience their world that way? They don't want to think, you know, I have all these choices. Why do you think that is?
Then everything that happened, you are to blame.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very scary.
You know, even
Yeah.
not everything, but even some things, it's almost like they're so afraid of, yeah, the blame, the responsibility of it. I guess kind of the obligation. Like if you could choose happiness and you feel sad, then does that mean you're wrong? You've done something wrong?
Yeah, so I don't believe in this right versus wrong thing, and it is also why the kind of spirituality I'm into does not preach about morality. It's just everything is your own karma. You choose it. There's no right or wrong.
Mm.
Just make sure that it is what you want. It is what you choose consciously, and embrace it. Like people punch me in the face, I can look at it like, wow, I've never been punched in the face in my life. This is new.
Mm-hmm.
I will embrace this experience. Like not many people get to feel being punched in the face.
Yeah.
I can look at it that way, or I can take it personally and take it as an identity attack thing. I feel like most people suffering is linked to an attack on their identity.
Mm. You know, this is one of my favorite topics.
Yes.
Yeah. So I kind of, let's first kind of wrap up this idea of right or wrong, and then we'll go to what I call identity hits. You just called it an identity attack. So remind me.
Yeah.
As we go on this. So like in the same way that and we try to put a space between whatever happens and our reaction, and not just immediately think, oh, this is good. It's always good that this happens, or this is bad. It's always bad. For instance, when I experience insomnia. So instead of thinking of things in terms of good and bad and kind of prejudging them, to try to, keep an open mind, have a more neutral, natural response to things, and kind of more go with the flow and just be in the present and not necessarily project into the future all the time about what this means, right? But
Mhm.
instead just experience the thing for the sake of the experience. As you say, this is the first time I've been punched in the face. So I think there's also, I think what you're describing is a similar approach to like right versus wrong. That if things aren't kind of good or bad, they're neither are they right or wrong.
Mm.
But would you say that there are like certain things that are things that are just wrong? Like it's wrong for somebody to do a particular thing, and what would those wrong things be?
I wouldn't say wrong. It's just I wouldn't do that
Mm-hmm.
as a choice, not because I think it's like morally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's something I wouldn't want happen to myself, then I wouldn't do it to you because it does not promote the kind of society I want to live in.
Uh,
So my action have consequences and I'm choosing to do right or do the kind of actions that would help create the kind of world I want to live in. It's not really right or wrong. I mean, chaos would have its benefits. Yeah.
uh-huh. Chaos also has its benefits. It's true. Especially during the playground stage, I was like, yeah, chaos is great often, you know,
Yeah.
in certain circumstances. So
Yeah.
this isn't so different from I think the way I think about right or wrong, because, and this is kind of like, when you think of right or wrong, as at least for you, right for you is something that leads to the kind of world, this kind of society that you want to have, a good, nice, sustainable society. And so I think that's true too, because the things that I kind of think of as being right or wrong are things, that also kind of line up with that. And one of the things that I feel really strongly about in terms of right or wrong is that in order to have like a society in which people can be like everything that, like fulfill their ultimate potential, let's say, one thing that you would kind of just like reverse engineering, what would you need to have in terms of a structure to allow everybody to be as powerful, as enabled,
Mm.
100% fulfilling their potential? Well, then they would also have a really big potential to do harm, with the increased potential to do good, or to benefit others, let's say. They would have an increased potential to hurt others. And I think, there has to be kind of like a way to say, well, like, how can we, what are kind of the rules of engagement if you have all these people who interact, and even if there are no scarce resources, even if you kind of take that away, in a little hypothetical, you're still kind of interacting with these people, and how can people engage with each other in a way that's kind of sustainable? And so that's where I come up with the idea of like, people's personhood, their
Mm.
agency, their identity being kind of sacrosanct, that we have to kind of, the same way that we have property lines, for houses and stuff, and I get to do on my house what I want, you get to do on your house what you want, that it's the same with your own identity, your own personhood, and that to try to um, infringe on somebody's, autonomy in that way is a wrong, right? So you have to kind of acknowledge that people have agency, because if you want the right to choose, you want Tim Schill in your life, then it seems only fair, as you say, to kind of acknowledge that in somebody else's life. So that's where I come up with like, okay, personal boundaries are really important. You always have to keep them in
Yes.
mind, enforce your own personal boundaries, and don't infringe on the personal boundaries of others. But you're right that I mostly do come up with it by thinking, well, what could how could you make a society sustainable in which everybody's achieving their potential? And I just kind of logically come to this conclusion that you have to have the personal boundaries.
Mm.
But let's
Yeah.
talk. So you do think that like in the world of all these things, still, like personal boundaries, or what role would that play? And then we'll get to identity hits.
Mm. What role would like respecting personhood play?
Yeah, personal boundaries. Yeah, like how would you enforce or not enforce, or
I think you have to have that realization or the experience that we are all equal. It's really hard without that because I did not have that. So it's a world of, pyramid, like food chain thing. You tell me that we're all equal, I will laugh at you. But now, after having experienced that and being able to see people, or not just people, every living creature, every object, kind of, we're all equal. We're all from the source of the same creation. We're all creation, having the same origin. And like back to the quantum physics thing, we're all at the most basic level energy form. So we're all equal. And so I will respect you as much as I will respect my choice to choose, my freedom to choose. Yeah. And yes, and putting, like you say, putting space between actions and or things that happen is very helpful. Like in meditation, I think the one I did, it's called being an observer. Like try to take the seat of an observer. Why am I reacting this way? Why does this emotion arise? Why is this action happening? Like just take a back seat and create some space and not just be reactionary. You have the freedom to actively choose how you're going to act, not just react to things mindlessly. Yeah, and I kept telling my mom, because she is very easily offended and she's also very emotional. So after I experienced this change, I've been asking her, trying to get her more introspective, although it didn't really work as well so far. But yeah, I asked her, like, why would you feel offended that this person say this thing? Would you feel equally offended if some random stranger on the street say this to you? So like, why? What is it that this person, this coworker, say this thing would offend you? And yeah, and then she said, oh, there's no respect or whatever. And I try to like link it to the identity thing, but I don't think she realized what identity is yet.
So this is a good segue then to talk about identity and identity hits. So what do you mean by you tried to link it to with your mom to the identity thing?
I think people have ego that they don't realize that if you have such an ego, you don't realize how insignificant you are. Then you take everything personally. You think that it is against you. It is out of disrespect. And it devalue you as a human being. But you have a choice not to base your self-worth on how people treat you.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a really good summary. That was like, very rich. There were like a million little points. First of all, I think it's funny that we have this phrase, take something personally. And I love the meme, the Michael Jordan meme. Maybe you've seen it from his, I think, is it The Last Dance or something, the HBO, whatever documentary, where he's like, and I took that personally. And it is kind of funny if you kind of like unpack the etymology, the like word kind of origin or breakdown. What does it mean to take something personally? It's like, I don't know, it's like thinking about the the way certain words sound. It's just like, yeah, why are you taking it personally? Like, was it meant to be personal? Was it like you're essentially making something about you? And did it have anything to do with you? Was it like, is it a reflection on you at all? Right? And even if it was, Like, do you have no choice but to just take it in? You know, if somebody even like directs something at you, they say something negative at you, and they mean for you to take it personally, why would you do it? Why would you still take it personally? You know, be say, no, I won't take it personally. I won't be kind of offended or whatever, but that doesn't seem to be like the way that most people respond in those instances, kind of like
Mm.
your mom. Why do you think people do take it personally then? Like
Yeah, so
what is the thing they get from
mm,
taking it personally? The value or whatever that they keep choosing to take it personally.
yeah, so the reason why I asked her if she would react this way if some random stranger on the street does the same to her is because I feel like in that case she wouldn't, because she doesn't know that person. She
Mm,
does not expect anything from that person. So why a coworker doing it to her, she would take it personally because you have some sort of expectation
mm,
with your interaction. Like I I think people treat relationships as a transaction.
uh,
I treat you well, you treat me well. I treat you with respect, so I expect you to also treat me with respect. But if you take that out, and I also think it comes from identity because I acknowledge and respect your identity and you do the same for me. But if you don't have that mentality, then you wouldn't take it personally. You would just realize that people are complex, people have flaws, and you are the same as flawed as they are. You probably do something that they don't like as well. So you can be forgiving and it's not really about you.
yes, yes, I think that's especially, yeah, it's even if they kind of mean for it to be about you, it's you used a very good word. Like, why would it devalue you? You know,
Mm,
like how can somebody have an effect on your valuation? Like, even if you wanted to kind of take it personally, you could probably logically think, like, okay, you know, your value, whatever you say, think your own personal values based on, it doesn't really have anything to do with the way your coworker treated you on some random Tuesday, you know?
yes.
Right? You're, you know, like you're loving to your family, you're good at your job, or
Yeah.
you know, you have good hobbies, you clean up trash when you see it on the street, like all these things adding up together.
Yeah.
What, you know, and all that kind of like, you know, Lego bricks of your valuation of yourself or whatever, what role does the way somebody treats you or the way somebody thinks about you play in your actual evaluation? But we feel devalued, right? I guess, what do we feel? Kind of like what is the feeling that, what, I can't even kind of think of it. What do you think is the nature of the feeling that people feel that it makes it hurt really badly when it happens? It's the worst hurt that can happen is for you to feel, take this identity hit, you know, and feel kind of devalued.
I wouldn't know because I never really experienced it because
So you,
I was trying to ask my mom how it felt because I really don't know why it will affect her so much. I was like, well, does the coworker saying this thing cost you to lose like a couple hundred in your bank savings?
mm,
No. So why are you so upset?
yeah.
And she'll be like, oh, she just doesn't respect my person or whatever.
Yeah.
And
You
then I
know,
say, so it's a pride thing, right? Yeah,
yeah.
it's a self-worth thing.
So I actually kind of go like maybe a different direction than you, or you know, like feel free to correct me on this.
Mm-hmm.
I actually kind of look at the idea of identity hits as like it is kind of it's accurate that it happens, right? And I see it more as like evidence that we that it actually is so important to respect people's personhood, their agency, their autonomy. That in this like sustainable world, I think that there is something, you know, a little bit inherent in the idea of like, yes, we are one in a sense, but we are all individuals. You know, there is like a duality of truth in this, and to the extent that somebody is trespassing on our identity property, then there is harm there, in the same way that it's like, well, if you somebody trespasses through your skin, for instance, with a knife or a bullet, that there is harm. You know, there's something, there's like a loss of integrity. And I think the kind of thing, so like, on the Discord, I have these terms and conditions. And one of the reasons why I have it is because I kind of assume a lot of people on there have personality disorders who come to the Discord. And I understand like identity, personality disorders is kind of like my view of it, in my own opinion, is that personality disorders all deal with some issue in terms of identity, some issue in terms of like who yourself is and how you perceive yourself. And that people who have that sensitivity, it's almost like a cancer ward. Like if people are particularly susceptible, their issue is this, especially via chemotherapy, their immune system is already compromised, it's already taxed, that we don't want to be introducing in potential areas of infection into the cancer ward. That similarly on the Discord, we want to respect this. So the terms and conditions have like various things all aimed at trying to not allow for anybody to infringe on somebody else's kind of personhood, trespass on somebody. So rules like, hey, you can't characterize people, you can't tell people what to do. That one I actually got from my brother Jim. He teaches music, and that was like his major rule is nobody can tell anybody else what to do, and it's because he's an agency freak. If you think I am, he's like twice as crazy about it, and at first I was like, no, it's crazy that you let your kids just do whatever. But he's like, well, what am I going to do? Like, he's like, I had this realization when I was trying to force my 4-year-old into his head into a shirt, and his arms, like contort them and jam them up into the arms of the shirt. And he's like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the value here? I'm just gonna like be like, no, my desire to put you in a shirt right now, right this second, is more important than anything about your autonomy as a human being, or like, your ability to like kind of choose for yourself, what and when and how things are gonna happen. So yeah, he's a total agency freak. So yeah, don't tell people what to do, don't characterize people. And that's kind of like, everybody has the right to their own worldview and their own beliefs and their own kind of self-conception, their own opinions or whatever. So if you kind of like infringe in these particular ways, I think it is an identity hit. So I think of it as like, yeah, if you do eat too much sugar, you might get diabetes. Like, that's just kind of a fact of life, is that for whatever reason, I don't even know if I have a good explanation for why, if you, if you do these types of things, then it does hurt. It hurts. And people do react, like it hurts psychologically. I think that we're meant to have, I guess this is my underlying philosophy about it, that we're meant to have some integrity as to our identity and our self, the same way that our skin is meant to have some integrity. It's there intentionally to keep out foreign agents. Similarly, our identity and our kind of personal boundaries are there to keep out foreign agents, because only in that type of circumstance can you have the free and full expression of self. Kind of similar to like a plant can't have its roots choked by weeds. You have to kind of take out those foreign agents in order to see the full and free expression of self. And that when people kind of sense the incursion, then they respond with these identity hits, which is like, oh, now I don't feel the full and free expression of myself, and that really hurts. But I also think that you are right in the sense that a lot of it is ego related. So like Paul Graham, right? It's so funny because I think he's a smart guy or whatever, but the smartest thing he ever wrote to me is this essay, Keep Your
Keep your
Identity,
identity small.
Small. Right? I reference it all the time, in which he kind of says, yeah, a lot of you guys are drawing your personal identity boundaries to include things that aren't really you. So you love the Denver Broncos. Well, that's not who you are as a person. How they perform in a game is not a direct reflection on you as an individual. You may be a fan, that's great or whatever, or you identify with particular things, you identify with your nationality, your ethnicity. Like these things can be parts of your self-expression, but they're, like question, whether they are exactly you as a person. The fact that you're a computer programmer, is that who you are as a person? Or maybe some of the underlying things that you are as a person find expression via being a computer programmer, right? That seems more
Yeah.
likely, especially since if you were born 3,000 years ago in some other like part of the world or whatever, like you'd see a different identity expression, right? But you'd still be you, but so kind of understanding that like there are certain things that are more you than others,
Mm.
I guess, is what kind of Paul Graham's saying. And I do think like with ego, often we kind of, I don't know. Number one, I think it probably happens for two reasons. As one, it kind of happens accidentally. Then that's the Paul Graham thing, is you've accidentally identified so strongly with a soccer team that now you're willing to kill the other people via soccer hooliganism. You're like, I love this soccer team so much, I'm going to kill other people because of it. That would be kind of a crazy extreme. And then I think sometimes it happens accidentally. You've just happened to, incorporate this into your identity, and you probably shouldn't have. It's a foreign body, it's a foreign entity. And then the second thing is, I think sometimes it happens intentionally where people want to be ego hurt or offended. And I think it's because, in a way, they get the same pleasure from being offended in this like ego identity hit way that they get from self expression. Because it is, in a
Yes.
way, it at least very closely imitates self expression.
Yes, I actually would take a step back and think about why it exists in the first place, evolutionary. So I think ego is essentially a shortcut for you to kind of enhance your survival. Like maybe our ancestors over so many generations were conditioned to believe that when you take an ego hit, it impacts your survival.
Mm.
So genetically, we're like conditioned to have that kind of reflex without realizing that it might not be true, or it now we're like applying it too broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's why I think what I say about not wanting to be so obsessed with survival food also kind of address this issue, which is not to think of yourself or your life or your survival as such a big thing. We're
Yeah.
all just so insignificant. Like if you think of the extent of the cosmos and time, you really are just a pop up. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a bubble.
So it's just kind of expanding a little bit. My interpretation of what you said about the evolutionary thing, I
Mm.
think, is that we're a tribal species. This is what I learned going to Roanoke in Virginia, is that it was the first colony of white settlers in North America, I think, or like, the United States kind of region essentially. And they lasted for very short and they relied almost entirely on the Native Americans. But it was kind of like because they didn't have like enough of a foothold. Like you yourself can't just like live in the wilderness. You need like the more people there are around you or whatever. So living in that tribal society, to be expelled from that society often meant death, I think is what you're saying. So when we think of like, oh, somebody thinks this bad thing about me or somebody treated me with disrespect, it might trigger in them a survival instinct, that is evolutionary in basis, which is I can't have people think badly of me, otherwise I'll be expelled from the tribe and I can't survive by myself out in the wilderness. That's just a reality. And so the concern, then the over concern with survival leads in this sense to being very concerned about what people think of you, which,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's not just individual survival within a group, it's also group survival. Like we as a group embrace this value, and now say religion, and now another group with a different religion is coming to attack us, so we have to protect
Yeah.
our
So,
religion. Yeah.
so all these things that we kind of identify with did probably play a role evolutionarily in terms of our survival. but
Mhm.
probably have a very small, or less, or just kind of more nuanced, maybe even than we often think, or we're just hardwired to think when somebody slights us by, not treating us with as much respect as we think we deserve, for instance, in an office environment. Yeah, this has been great and interesting. I can tell that my brain is getting taxed because we've been talking about so many
Yes, big topics.
big topics. And so I it's been so awesome talking with you. I feel like we've covered almost everything I care about
Mhm.
deeply. And it's so interesting to get your perspective. And I think it's I talked about the stories about my brother Jim and my mother and myself. And you told me something before we started recording about how your husband views the difference, just to illustrate how different you've become. You want to tell that story?
Yes, my husband has been telling people that someone kidnapped his wife and replaced her with a clone,
Uh-huh.
which is me right now.
Looks like
Yeah,
you, talks like you,
yeah.
clone, programmed completely different.
Yes.
But how would you say, like what was your happiness level before and what's your happiness level now?
My happiness before was conditional.
Hmm.
I will only be happy if this happens, if I achieve this, if everything goes as I planned it. Now it's just there. I didn't even have to do anything.
Hmm.
I That's the first decision I make every morning when I wake up is today I choose to be happy no matter what happened.
Hmm.
And yeah, you were saying physical ailment, like when you have insomnia, you feel like it's just gonna be bad. I don't even think that is true because people did say that going through chemotherapy, you're gonna feel like shit.
Hmm.
And that was a decision I made early on when I knew I was gonna go through chemotherapy, is that I will not suffer any physical ailment or side effect from it. And I did not. So I really feel that you have more control over even just physical experience, mind over matter. Your brain really is more powerful than you think.
Yes. So this desire, this Tim Schill desire to control, you finally have found, and it's not been in orchestrating or manipulating, but in this the way that you choose to respond to your life and engage with your life. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes. So it's not reactionary anymore. Happiness is no longer a reaction, it is a decision.
Hmm. Well, do you have anything else that you want to share before we wrap it up? Sounds like your husband's
Um,
like playing some dishes in the background.
yes.
He's like, this was supposed to be over at a certain time.
No, yeah, not really. He knew this is happening.
All right, awesome. Anything else?
Not that I can think of. I think this is the right spot to end this.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining me. Sorry about my connection failure. And hopefully we can like get you on again, get you on with some other people. I know we had
Yeah.
like part one of something about self or something. We did talk a lot about self this time. But yeah, it's always fascinating to talk with you. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. That's about the gratitude and willpower with
Oh,
Elsa.
yes. Uh-huh. We'll
Yeah.
have to like look back at that. All
Mhm.
right. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of it.
Bye.